Hello, hello. There we go. All right. I'm
I did not think that this would happen anytime soon. We had
just watching
multiple
all the
publications stating
Steam
that
Deck
this wouldn't happen
OLED
at all. But then
coverage.
it showed up in studio and I couldn't believe my eyes. A fully refreshed Steam Deck. And I mean fully refreshed. Every single major component of the system is new. We have a larger OLED display. We have a new chip, a 6nm chip, more energy efficient. We have slightly tweaked sticks. The touchpad, the speakers are better. The battery's bigger, longer battery life. We have an improved thermal system.
November 16th can't come fast
enough. Exterior
enough.
dimensions, because that's one of the very few things that hasn't really changed per se. The biggest difference is like the presence of this new orange power button. It just like signifies the kind of new version of it. Even the screen cutout is the same as the larger panel, but because of the thinner bezels, the old accessories all work. So the kill switch from Dbrand still fits perfectly, and same with their screen protectors. All right, let's start with the displays. So this here is the previous model, like the original Steam Deck with its 7-inch display. So it was a 60 hertz panel, 400 nits, but the biggest issue with it was really the color reproduction. It just was not a particularly colorful or color accurate display. And I think when it comes to games, a lot of the kind of subtle details and visual nuance of games are just lost when you're displaying it on a mediocre screen. But with this new panel, it's a different story. We've got a 7.4-inch OLED that runs at 90 hertz, 600 nits brightness that goes up to 1,000 nits.
I've literally been waiting
up there.
to just
it's more
stream all of this content.
It's got way better contrast. So the benefits of this display are
this is
immediately
amazing.
Noticeable in pretty much every game. Like bright and colorful games look awesome, like you'd expect. But even dark and moody games are significantly better because the blacks are just black instead of like a gray backlit pixel. It's just so much nicer to look at. And also, HDR content for the games that do support it looks awesome. Like the bright elements just blast out of the screen at 1,000 nits. Now, this display also is a 90 hertz panel, and on games that make use of it, like this one, Dead Cells, it's just immediately noticeable. It's difficult to convey the kind of increase in frame rate on a 60 hertz video like you're watching, but if you've just played any high refresh game, the difference from 60 to 90 is very significant. Keep in mind though that there are other devices out there with significantly faster screens and more powerful processors, but the fact that the Steam Deck went from 60 to 90 is already a huge win in my books. Now in terms of the screen size, it's not massively larger, so it's a little bit bigger, but I would say that the improvements that you get from the new Steam Deck do not come from the screen size, at least for me. It's also the same resolution, still 1280 by 800. It's just that the image quality is so much better. Now, one last thing, if you'll remember, Steam Decks come in 3 configurations. It's like the base model, and then the mid-tier, and then the top tier. But only the mid-tier and top tier are gonna get this OLED refresh. So the top tier configurations, like this unit here, have this anti-glare etched glass finish to them. And the purpose of it is to kind of cut down some of the reflections. So this unit here does not have that etched glass coating. So if you're in a really bright environment or a brightly lit room, sometimes those reflections can be a little bit harsh, right? But here, they're diffused a bit. The problem is though, because it's an OLED display, I feel like you lose some of the OLED properties. Like the popping colors and the really black blacks are lost because of that matte finish on that etched glass. So as a demonstration, this is, it's like a screen protector. This is gonna be a very crude demonstration, but hopefully it gets the point across. If you give it a second for this screen to kind of fuse on, or the protector to fuse on, look at the difference in the color. Like look at the black part of the menu there, right? On the left side is that etched glass. It's almost lost its true black nature because of the OLED, right? But on the right, with that smooth screen protector on it, it's still quite dark. So I'm just thinking, if you're gonna purchase one of these things, unless you really care about brightly lit environments and you wanna cut down those reflections badly, I would opt for the regular screen without that anti-glare property. The other thing is that if you get a screen protector, you put it on, it fixes it. But I'm just saying, with the anti-glare, you lose a lot of that OLED goodness. The new device also has slightly better sticks in the sense that the rubber top has a bit of a lip to it, so it's just nicer to grip. It's also a different ball joint color. It's black instead of gray. But the shoulder buttons also had a bit of an upgrade. So on the old one, I found that if you had longer fingers, if you just pressed that shoulder in a different spot, it wouldn't be a consistent press. Like it would actuate nicely at the edges, but if you brought it up to the top, if you had like longer fingers, it became harder and harder to press. And on the new one, the location of that button and the actuation point is different. So it's just like consistent and it's like a tighter click, as silly as it sounds. Okay, the haptics on this, actually they've changed the touchpad to be a little bit more accurate and a little bit more responsive, but there's also updated haptics, so they feel a lot more precise. They're just like a tighter ping as you move around.
Man,
the speakers
really
are also a little bit louder and bassier than before.
I got mine right now, right? Get this trash out of here. No, it's just like, and I can still keep my kill switch, which is good. I actually like this case a lot.
So the chip in here,
but it's going to be lighter.
6nm chip compared to the 7nm
chip
that was in the previous generation.
Changes.
But it's still running the same clock speeds and the same kind of power draw. The RAM is also still at 16 gigabytes, but it's running a little bit faster at 6,400 megatransfers per second. Now, because of that faster RAM, I was hoping that there'd be some kind of performance gains, but for my testing, if there is a performance bump, it's so slight I would consider it insignificant, at least for most gamers. It does resume from suspended games a little bit faster though, but with that new chip, because it's 6nm, it is a little bit more energy efficient, and because of that, you have slightly less heat. And with less heat, you have quieter fans that don't come on as often, and fans that don't stay on as long. So any kind of gaming sessions are both cooler and quieter than the original Steam Deck. And then in addition to that more energy efficient chip and the more energy efficient OLED screen, we also have a 25% larger battery. It's gone from 40 watt hours to 50. So you combine all those three things, you just get better battery life. Now, Valve claims a 30 to 50% bump in battery life. From my testing, the really demanding games got a more modest battery life improvement, and the charging speeds are also a little bit faster this year. So the Steam Deck has always been easy to open, easy to repair, but this year they've done a few things to make it even better. So first, the screws. The old screw was this Phillips headed screw that I've stripped so badly on my previous Steam Deck. The new ones are these machined Torx screws. If you know anything about Torx, or you know anything about screws, that's definitely better. And to get inside, it's just a quick pull of the side plastic area, or at least that's how I do it. And this is the inside. Now the first thing I noticed was like, okay, the battery is a very similar shape to the previous generation. This is, actually I should put them like this, like the earlier part of the video. So the old one's up top, the new one is down here. So I thought, well, I was hoping that this new battery would be able to fit into the old battery spot and then people could all get 50 watt hour batteries. You can't. They look very similar in shape, but this new one's a little bit taller, and because of this framing, you wouldn't be able to fit this one into there, unfortunately. Okay, let's remove the shrouding here to take a look at the internals. The first thing that you should be aware of is almost everything has changed on the inside. So the good news is that, okay, it's a major refresh. The bad news is that you can't just swap out parts. You can't just pick and choose the new things and put them to the old one to kind of update it. Unfortunately, the fan is a little bit bigger, better, and quieter. And then on the side here, you'll notice that the SSD is in a similar position, but different orientation. But if you remove last year's SSD, you can see the Intel Wi-Fi card that was underneath it. This year, it's a much larger Wi-Fi and Bluetooth chip. This is from a company called QuickTel, and it now supports Wi-Fi 6E as well as Bluetooth 5.3. And there's a dedicated antenna just for the Bluetooth signal. If you look at the chip itself, it's about the same size as the 7nm chip from the previous generation. Now, in regards to pricing, Valve is running the same kind of pricing tiers as the original Steam Deck launch. So they have a $399 base model, which remains unchanged. It's still the same original $399 model with 256 gigs of storage, but the mid-tier and the top tier are these OLED refresh models with larger storage than before. So the mid-tier has 512 gigs, the top tier has a terabyte of storage. I didn't even close this properly. And my thoughts on it are that I think the pricing is quite fair. I would say that considering all that you're getting, it's a very fair price. The thing that my mind goes to is like, I just did a video on Sony's PlayStation 5 refresh, like their updated kind of slim version. And the difference in just company mantra of what they're trying to do is wild. Like the Sony's PlayStation 5 Slim seems to be just focused on, you know, some kind of monetary gain for Sony. But here,
get some money. That's exactly what it is.
Crazy refresh in the sense that they put so much effort to do all these tweaks and adjustments for what the users actually want. And a lot of it was just unnecessary, but they just did it because they could. And also, the pricing. Like, this could have been so much more expensive, and I would have imagined that it would have cost more. For this kind of update, but they've kept the same kind of pricing with more storage. I mean, only Valve can pull this off because of the whole Steam thing and how they own it and how they're just making money. But just, it's so interesting how Sony did that and Valve did this. Okay, I'm gonna wrap this up with a little demo of the case. Actually, something I keep wanting to talk about. This is 30 grams lighter than the previous version. I kept wanting to say that over the course of this entire video, but it didn't have the opportunity. It's a little bit lighter. It's not a significant difference though. It's noticeable, but I would argue not particularly significant. So this is the new case, and it's a two-piece case. I don't know if that's the best way to describe it, but it makes it sound like a bikini. Two-piece in the sense that, well, it opens up like a regular case. It's got like the Velcro up front, and you can open it up, white microfiber, but it also has a second functionality where there's an inner case, and this inner case allows you to transport the product in a lighter package. So this, right, this is a little bit more compact than that big case. So it's like a 2-in-1 case, but when you use this kind of slimmer case, you don't have the ability to store the AC adapter in the back, like the big case, like the original one. But yeah, a two-piece case. But there you have it. But if you are interested in one of these handheld devices, do keep in mind that the Steam Deck, as awesome as it is, even this new OLED version, it's not going to be as powerful as some of those Windows handhelds. If you're looking for AAA gaming with the smoothest and best frame rates, those will do a better job than this thing. Okay, hope you enjoyed the video.
Yeah. We did enjoy the video.
Okay.
All right, let me see.
They said they wouldn't do this, right? But there was the hardware certification in South Korea, right? Then, follow me here, Phoronix caught Valve sneaking code names into the Linux kernel. Final Fantasy VII fans know that Sephiroth and Aerith had a bit of a run-in, and then we all know Aerith was a Valve code name for the... Okay, fine. Valve just launched an OLED Steam Deck, and I know what you guys are thinking. That sounds great, but didn't they say not to expect a new Steam Deck for years? Well, that's what we heard, but it's not actually what they said. We can talk about that later. For now, this thing is freaking awesome. I am talking larger, incredible HDR screen, massively better battery life, 3 times faster game downloads, more included storage, and get this, you guys, without raising the price. Take that, Sony. So get your pre-order in now, obviously.
Everybody hates Sony.
Also stay tuned, because on top of all the improvements that they highlighted for us to talk about in our review, there's more that they wanted us to discover on our own. And those turned out to be very interesting, like our sponsor.
Origin PC. Configure your next-gen gaming desktop or laptop and save big. Save up to $900 off select laptops and up to $275 off select desktops at the link below.
There's no other way to put it. This thing is beautiful. This is not just a Steam Deck with an OLED display. This is a Steam Deck with a custom HDR OLED display. The first we've ever seen in a handheld, with a rated peak brightness of 1000 nits in HDR, a rated 1,000,000:1 contrast ratio, and 110% coverage of the DCI-P3 color space. It is even bigger than the original, coming in at 7.4 inches rather than the original 7, which they pulled off by shrinking the bezels rather than by increasing the size of the unit, making it feel even more immersive. Oh, and did I mention that it now does 90 Hz refresh rate for smoother animations and more responsive inputs? I mean, after the mildly disappointing screen in the original deck, this is everything that I could have asked for. Well, almost everything. We're still stuck at 800p resolution, but what blew my mind about that was how hard it was to tell. I mean, I could have sworn that it was higher, but I guess that just goes to show you how much our perception is impacted by other factors, like brightness, contrast, and color reproduction. Valve nailed this thing. Like, the color in sRGB mode is dead on, with even more impressive saturation in HDR. It's easier on the eyes in low light conditions, and the contrast ratio is functionally infinite. So let me just put it this way. This thing pops. The only thing I could ask for would be support for variable refresh rate on the built-in screen. But Valve says that this just wasn't possible, not because they didn't do the software work, it'll work on an external display, but because the internal display uses a MIPI interface. When I pressed them on why they didn't use EDP, which would support VRR, they were actually kind of evasive. So what we suspect is that Valve is still not shipping the kinds of volumes that would justify a completely custom screen, putting them at the mercy of what's kind of available on the market. And by that I mean that based on the identical subpixel layout, we suspect that they're using the same source that Nintendo does for the Switch OLED, which is important because most sources that we can find suspect that Nintendo is using a MIPI derivative for their displays. Now, to be clear, we don't have any proof of this, but if we're right, it's probably a really good thing based on that recent video looking at OLED Switch burn-in. Yeah, it will eventually, but only if abused. So, fingers crossed. That's not it, but. Now, I'm sure you're practically yelling at your screen by now. Hey, Valve said they weren't gonna make a new Steam Deck, not for years. What gives with this? But that's not quite how it went down. There were a bunch of articles earlier this year after veteran Valve programmer Pierre-Loup Griffet discussed how Valve would need to do a ton of work to re-engineer the internals to make an OLED screen work. And then another round more recently of him saying, he doesn't foresee the performance target for Steam Deck changing for the next couple of years, which we interpreted to mean that no new hardware was coming. But if you read the actual quotes from him, rather than skimming the headlines, he never actually said we wouldn't get a mid-generation upgrade. We just assumed that, and we all know what happens when we do that. And get this, not only is the new screen better, it's thinner, which carves out some precious space behind it for a larger battery. Steam Deck OLED, I'm not sure if Valve calls it that, but we're gonna call it that, boasts a 50 watt-hour battery, which Valve says should charge faster and last up to 50% longer than the old one, which seems like some pretty questionable math on the surface, especially given that the included charging brick has identical specs. But our results on both of these counts were right in line with their claims. And the why of that was one of the things that we got to investigate on our own. You see, some of these gains come from the size of the battery, some from a newer chemistry, some come from the more efficient screen, and some come from the new silicon that AMD spun for this version. Now, before you get too excited, Valve was very clear that the new 6nm die-shrunk processor is intended to perform just like the previous 7nm version. Their exact words were, often equivalent, never worse. But that doesn't sound like not better. And as we've learned, there's as much to be gleaned in what Valve doesn't say as there is in what they do say. Now, it's beyond the scope of this video, but I would be particularly interested to see what kind of results the hypermiling community can get from this new die alongside Valve's new underclocking features. We're going to talk about out-of-the-box performance though, starting with Returnal. Running the built-in benchmark at 1280x800 on the low preset, we got virtually identical performance, with only the maximum FPS being significantly different from the original deck. Same story going out for a rip on our favorite Kanakistan track in F123. Similar enough that most people wouldn't notice it day to day, but an improvement that is well beyond our margin of error in our measurements. I'll take it. Or at least I would until something weird happened. In Cyberpunk 2077, we saw a significant performance drop. Using the Steam Deck preset in both cases, our minimum FPS was quite a bit lower than the original deck. The good news, however, is that average FPS wasn't impacted, so what we suspect is that the new APU was stuck in a lower power state at the start of the benchmark and then ramped up, which is good because that should be easy enough to fix in the coming weeks. Or, I mean, probably days at the rate that Valve has been pushing out patches to take the Steam Deck from the unfinished state that it was in when I first reviewed it to the polished experience that it is today. Now, given that our focus is on the new hardware, we aren't going to get into a ton of depth about what Valve's done with SteamOS lately, but the incredible work that they've done on HDR and color management in Linux is just the tip of the iceberg. Once you manage to drag your eyes away from the new screen, you might notice the thumbsticks. Before you ask, no, they're not Hall effect. But there's a new texture and a slightly different profile that most people around the office seemed to prefer. When they were asked, well, why didn't you go with Hall effect sticks? It seems like such a no-brainer upgrade. Valve said that ultimately they were unsatisfied with their reliability at this time, so fingers crossed for the future, but not today. Other tweaks to the outside, colors of the button labels and the bases of the thumbsticks are different. Power button is now a nice almost LTT orange. The power LED is a WRGB diode to give you more feedback about your charge state, and the screws on the back of the deck are Torx rather than Phillips. Very nice, but that's about it for the exterior changes, and it looks like the dimensions are identical, which raises a big question for me. Will your OG deck accessories still fit? Now, Dbrand was desperate to know, which makes sense given their line of work, and we thought about just lending them a unit, but I was all like, hey, I have the power in this relationship for a change. Why don't we charge them to test it and then do it on camera where everyone can see it? I actually don't know the correct way to put this on, so I'm just gonna go for it. Doesn't seem like anything is different, but just because it doesn't seem different doesn't mean it's exactly right necessarily. Micro SD slot, perfect. Rear buttons, perfect. Top buttons, LEDs, all visible, all accessible, looks good to me. Obviously, if the kill switch goes on, then their other accessories will fit, but what the heck. If you don't need the kickstand, there's also their universal mount. Go ahead and pop that on. Kind of looks like Valve's Valve. Lots of people use these for external battery banks, but you can mount pretty much anything to your Steam Deck with it. I mean, look at that. Wow. Screwdriver. Now, one thing that's not going to go as smoothly is the screen protector. Today has a bigger one because it's only a bezel reduction. The actual piece of glass is the same size, and I'm sure you will do a really, really good job of applying it instead of just doing it in a hurry like I'm doing because I'm on camera. Oh man, that's way off. Just don't look that close. They include two though because they assume you'll screw one up, I guess. Oh, this is hilarious. The notes from Dbrand say, don't need to actually install. Probably because they knew that I would screw it up if I did it in a hurry. Anyway, the point is, thanks Dbrand for sending this stuff over. We'll have links in the description along with the new Steam Deck and everything else we feature. Now at this point, you know everything you need to know about this thing as a consumer. But the tinkerers, you're gonna wanna stay tuned because internally, a lot more has changed than you would probably think. Starting with something that would be really easy to overlook. These screws now go into metal screw bosses rather than just into the plastic housing, which is great if you want to get into or out of your deck multiple times, say for example to upgrade your storage. And speaking of, Valve has made a sincere effort to reduce the number of different types of screws involved, making repairs and modifications a much more pleasant task. That doesn't mean, however, that intergenerational compatibility is going to be perfect. The motherboard has changed, and the daughter boards on both sides of the unit have been reshaped and redesigned, with the thumbstick boards now having these little wings. Not sure exactly what to call them, but they're a mounting point for the switches for the shoulder buttons, which means that any third-party replacement joysticks are going to have to be redesigned before they're going to work in the new deck. The battery is still glued in place, but Valve says that they didn't go hog wild with the glue this time, so battery replacements should be a little less terrible. And a dedicated DSP is present now to take some load off of the APU for audio processing, with Valve claiming that the new unit delivers refined haptics, cleaner audio, improved bass response, and better stereo separation. We didn't really find any of these to be game-changing, but they are certainly welcome improvements. Superficially, the new cooling setup looks quite a lot like what we saw in the refreshed Steam Decks that they've been shipping in recent months, but on closer inspection, the mounting points are actually different, and there's a lot more open space under the shroud with far fewer components on the main board getting in the way of airflow. Our acoustic chamber is still in the works, but even without it, we observed a noticeable reduction in fan noise, and that's with the system running cooler overall. Under that cooling system, we have some more big spec upgrades. Like the original, our new APU comes with 16 gigs of LPDDR5, but this time it's 6,400 megatransfer per second compared to the 5,500 of the original. That is a huge increase and explains a significant amount of the performance uplift. And there's a new custom Wi-Fi module that had us peaking in the real world at around 650 megabits per second when downloading games on our Wi-Fi 6E network here at the lab. That is outstanding and a huge difference maker. If you've ever downloaded a big game on your deck, you're gonna know what I'm talking about. Now, the wireless module is still soldered down, which is a bit of a bummer, especially because looking back at the original and seeing what a big improvement this is, wouldn't it have been nice if that one hadn't been soldered? But according to Valve, this was for good reason and allowed them to create a specialized interface between the Wi-Fi module and the APU, which has the benefit of moving the power circuitry onto the main board rather than the Wi-Fi card, and of allowing them to run a dedicated antenna for Bluetooth 5.3. Also, to its credit, the new Wi-Fi chip is at least soldered further away from the M.2 slot for the SSD, which should hopefully result in less interference. And speaking of storage, let's talk about the updated lineup for a moment here. The new top of the line includes 1 terabyte of NVMe storage and has the same anti-glare etching on the glass as the original. It also includes this new 2-part case that will help save some room in your backpack, if you don't happen to have a nice tech-focused bag that has room for multiple laptops and a Steam Deck like ours does, lttstore.com.
I love their little
Base model
pictures.
is now 256 gigabytes for the same price as before, a quadrupling of storage, not to mention the speed upgrade, but this one has a catch. It's the old LCD version, and not just with the same screen, without any of the new upgrades. At least that's the case for now. So I would probably avoid that one, and I'd be looking at the mid-tier. It's $20 more than last gen, but it gets double the storage at that price and has all the new goodies. All it lacks are the anti-glare coating, which to me is not the end of the world, and a 2-part case. It's a smoking deal. There's also a 4th member of the family, the limited edition of the 1 terabyte that has an exclusive transparent shell, but that thing is so limited that Valve wouldn't even let us borrow one, even though they totally took our color scheme. We had to drive all the way down to Seattle to get this footage of it in person. It's like, you know, guys, you can just tell me if you want to hang out, and I'll say sure, as long as you support our team making great videos. Kind of like our sponsor.
Grammarly. Here at Linus Media Group, we're committed to constantly improving our writing using all the tools at our disposal, like
Oh, thank you.
get 20% off Grammarly Premium.
All
Some
right.
fans know that
All right. How do let me make myself big. Here's what I'll say about this thing. I guess the fact is that this OLED, this beautiful thing, has gotten 10 times better, and I need it. That's all it is to it. Like, I really use my Steam Deck a lot, and the biggest gripe I had was with the screen. Now that the fact that it has better battery, it's lighter, has better storage out the gate, and it has a better CPU, or at least the die is better to the point where it is more efficient and some technically stronger. This is a win-win situation. Now, I think the biggest thing a lot of people are concerned with is that it recently came out and it is now like a refresh already, and people hate early adoption for that reason. But honestly, I think the value of the original Steam Deck is still there. I don't think there is anyone that would say that this is a bad product at all. I just think that they understood what the community wanted, and they kind of are just giving it to them. Understandingly so, people may be upset about that, but I think either owning the older one isn't a bad thing. I think it's kind of like what the Nintendo Switch should have did 2 years after theirs first came out, and not so long after, to the point where nobody really wants that Switch OLED unless, I mean, you're a diehard Nintendo fan, but I'm just not interested because I can still just play to TV. But because this is something that is actually worthwhile, I think that is what's going to sell people on actually going out and purchasing this. So that's my thoughts on it. That's the hype train. I was just wanted to stop and watch a few videos. I already watched Digital Foundries. I couldn't wait. But yeah, it kind of just proves the point that yes, you can do refreshes, but if you're going to do a refresh, this is the refresh. This isn't some of the garbage that we've seen with the PS5 Slim, maybe even with the Xbox, because it's still the same price and it's not going to have a disc drive, and it's like those aren't real true revisions and like improvements. This is the first we've seen, and Valve just got into the handheld console or handheld gaming space, and they're already doing much better than most, especially Nintendo. Can't tell me otherwise. So it just goes to show the philosophy, the community, the actual value where Valve puts their value is really top notch, and I'm just excited. So I'm gonna end it at that because I don't really want this to be a part of the mainstream. But yeah, it's interesting. It is interesting. Interesting.